Did you know that your brain is resilient? Your brain has something called neuroplasticity, which is the ability to heal and rewire. And today we're going to be talking all about how to support your brain's resiliency in brain injury recovery. Whether you are the person who sustained a brain injury yourself, whether you are a loved one or a family member listening to this to support the person in your life who's had a brain injury, or if you are a healthcare practitioner, wherever you are at and wanting to learn more about brain injury, today's episode is going to be so encouraging and informative as we have Dr. Michelle Eisenmann here.
There is always hope, and you are not alone.
Hi, I'm Cristabelle Braden, and this is my brain injury podcast, Hope Survives. This is an uplifting podcast to bring hope to your darkest days. As a survivor of traumatic brain injury and multiple concussions and re-injuries, I know what it's like to struggle to find hope. I don't want anyone to feel as alone as I did, and that's why over 10 years ago, I started an online community called Hope After Head Injury, which has now launched into a nonprofit organization called Hope Survives. Hope Survives envisions a world in which every survivor of brain injury and every member of their family are seen, loved, heard, valued, supported, uplifted, and never alone. This podcast is an extension of that, and I'd love to invite you to join along as we explore the realities of life with brain injury, with messages of encouragement, interviews with doctors and professionals, and survivor and family stories. No matter where you're at on your journey, there is always hope.
With a little hope, you can make it through today. With a little faith, someday you'll get through the pain. Just a little love is enough to light the way through your darkest night. Hope survives. A little faith, a little love. Hope survives.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to Hope Survives podcast. It is an honor that you chose to turn this on today and listen to this. We are talking all about brain resiliency and neuroplasticity with a special guest, Dr. Michelle Eisenmann. Dr. Eisenmann is actually a member of the Hope Survives Board of Directors. She really believes in supporting and helping brain injury survivors and their families, and she is a Doctor of Functional Neurology at Resiliency Brain Health in Texas. She has a doctorate degree in chiropractic, a master's degree in clinical neurology, and fellowship studies in traumatic brain injury. Her approach combines chiropractic care with neurology. She focuses on root causes, including the intricate connection between gut health and brain function. She is incredible with years of experience working in the field of brain injury, but yet she is also a survivor of multiple brain injuries herself. And towards the end of this conversation, she actually shares a lot about her personal journey and how all of the things that she's sharing about neuroplasticity and lifestyle and things that you can do to help your brain to heal, she's actually personally experienced, which is what makes her, I think, such a wonderful practitioner and such a great advocate for brain injury survivors because she practices what she preaches. She is an amazing wealth of knowledge, and to be able to have recovered from multiple brain injuries, to be able to practice functional neurology is so inspiring. I am so grateful for Dr. Eisenmann, who, like I said, is on the founding board for the board of directors for Hope Survives. So she has been with us from the beginning of this nonprofit journey, and we are so grateful to have her on the podcast today. So at Hope Survives, we are currently working on developing more programs and workshops. At any time, make sure you're checking back on hopesurvives.org because we are updating with new workshops that are currently in the works, not announced yet, but I'm very excited to announce soon. We're also running some summer social hours. We just had one here in June, and it was so encouraging. I just love getting to chat with everyone without an agenda, just connect with others with brain injuries. I say without an agenda. It's not a support group, but we do have games. We did some games and some fun conversation prompts, and our social hours have been really fun. We're running art workshops. We have art submissions. So if you are an artist and you want to submit your art, you can go to hopesurvives.org/artwork until July 15th. We are accepting submissions for our upcoming greeting cards that we're going to have, and we want to feature brain injury survivor artwork. There's just a lot going on, and our support groups are running. We have one going pretty much every week. We have Hope After Head Injury, Hope for Couples, Found Connection, Hope for Family, Renewed by Faith, and I just love our groups. So this community is growing exponentially, and we're so grateful. Please make sure you're connected with us on Instagram, Facebook, all the places. But I just want you to know that you're not alone. That's what we're here for. And I know how discouraging it can be to feel like every day with brain injury is just so overwhelming. So I just want to make sure that every single survivor and family that's listening to this, make sure that you're connected to our group. Go on our website, sign up for our mailing list. We want to make sure that you are not navigating this alone. We also want to take a moment to acknowledge our podcast sponsor, the Functional Neurology Center. Their personalized neuro recovery programs offer hope for those suffering from brain injuries, dysautonomia, vestibular, chronic pain, stroke, movement dysfunction, developmental disorders, PPPD, FND, and complex post-concussion. You can find out more at thefnc.com. We are so grateful for Dr. Jeremy Schmo and the Functional Neurology Center for being a sponsor of Hope Survives. We are so grateful for how Hope Survives has been growing. If you would like to get involved, we also have volunteer opportunities. We have donating opportunities as a 501c3 nonprofit. So if there's any way that you'd like to connect, email us hi@hopesurvives.org and we can get you plugged in. You're not alone. And let's talk about neuroplasticity and brain resiliency. Thank you so much for listening today, and let's get into the conversation. I am so excited to welcome Dr. Michelle Eisenmann to Hope Survives podcast. Thank you so much for coming on here, Dr. Eisenmann.
Thank you so much for having me. As she said, hi, my name is Dr. Michelle Eisenmann. I work at Resiliency Brain Health, and we're talking about resiliency today. So that fits the bill right there. But I work in Coppell, Texas, DFW. You know, if you're familiar with it, I'm quite literally right by the airport. No one knows where Coppell is, but it's by the airport, DFW. And I am a functional neurologist. I have my doctorate in chiropractic. I have a master's in clinical neuroscience, and I got my diplomate, which for chiropractors is like somewhat of a specialty in neurology, functional neurology. And so I'm very excited to be talking to you today about this topic, and let's get going.
Yes, and you're a board member of Hope
I
Survives.
am.
Yeah, so we're so thrilled. You might have heard her share a little bit during our launch live stream. She sent over a video that you would have heard then, talking a little bit about, gosh, I can't even remember what it was about, but
Yeah, with my baby in the background. I was like newly postpartum, so that was interesting.
Well, thank you for being part of the founding board for Hope Survives. We are so thrilled to have your voice and your expertise helping to guide our programs and support as we move forward, and coming on the podcast today. So we're going to be talking about brain resiliency and neuroplasticity today. So can we just start off with the basics? What does neuroplasticity really mean, and how is it relevant to brain injury?
Yes. So neuroplasticity is, first off, there's two words combined into one. So neuro for neurology, plasticity for plasticine, and we all know that as like to be Play-Doh. So all it means is that the brain is malleable. There was a point in time in neuroscience that we used to think that the brain would develop and then it would stop developing. But what we do know now is that there are communication highways in our brain that can be rewired, restructured. I think the easiest way to envision it is a person that's had a stroke, and I think it's easier just because you can actually visually see it, and their lack of ability to be able to move a limb, but after therapy, they're able to move it again. So it's not that they lost a limb, it's just that the brain forgot they had a limb. But the same thing happens in TBI when it comes to neurological function, cortical versus subcortical functioning, vestibular, eye movements, autonomic. So these are all things that most of the people listening to this podcast are going to hear these buzzwords on, like, oh yeah, I was told that I had this issue or that issue. So neuroplasticity at the end of the day means that you can build new highways to be able to get better neurological function.
And that's so hopeful for people with brain injuries, right?
Yes, it is definitely not one of those things that you're going to stay like that forever. Now, there are certain things that can make you more resilient, or if you've had a brain injury, that you can actually do for yourself. And I think a lot of people don't realize that with TBI, especially, you have so much power as to what you can do to get better. I mean, I literally have this conversation, just had it with like a patient in another room. Like, there are so many things that you guys have under your control to actually assist your brain in building these pathways and strengthening and being resilient after injury, because that's what it is. It's just an injury. And so we're trying to make sure that our brain understands how to repair injury.
Yeah, that's so great. And we're going to get into some of those things later on in this conversation. So,
Yeah.
we've talked about neuroplasticity and that the brain can build new pathways. But is there a certain time window where neuroplasticity is most active after an injury, or how does that look as far as a timeline? Because I mean, I remember being told this was, 15 or so years ago. I remember being told that you're not really going to heal much after the first year or two. And I think people are still being told that. So, what is your perspective on that?
That's just very not true. There's a paper actually called like diminished brain resilience syndrome. That's how they're kind of trying to, which is perfect in my opinion, trying to coin like concussion and TBI, because TBI, we have to remember there's different kinds, and we cannot compare apples to oranges. We cannot compare a concussion to a severe TBI when someone's had a penetrating head wound. So of course, depending on your injury, that's kind of going to be somewhat your starting point. But it's just not true to say that you're not going to heal within a year or within a year. Like, I've heard all kinds of crazy things. Some people telling people like, oh no, this is forever. You're going to be like this forever. Or no, past the 5-year mark, you're not going to be able to heal. I'm like, who said that? At what point? Like, who said that? They? Who's they? So that's just not true. I've worked with people that have had TBI symptoms for 17 years, 20 years, and they have literally been able to improve their quality of life. Now, the wiggle room of a person with a TBI may be less. So you may have to be a little bit more strict with your sleep hygiene routine. You may have to be a little bit strict on your diet and nutrition. But guess what? That is something we all should do. So it's not something like every person that has a brain can benefit from nutrition, from sleep hygiene, from lifestyle factors. It just means that you may see a little bit of a decrease in function if you're not a little bit more on point with it. And so if you're not trying to take care of yourself and you're going to bed at like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning every night, then you can't expect your brain to perform at a certain level. But this whole narrative that you can't do anything for your brain, that's not true. Now, the level of how good are you going to get depends on you as a patient, on how compliant, one, you are with therapy, and two, with your lifestyle factors, because that is the thing that's going to determine the most success long term.
And finding the right doctor and care, because
Yes, there are
unfortunately,
some not really
yeah.
great people out there as well.
Yeah, I mean, or that are not up on current research. I'm constantly saying on this podcast, find a practitioner that's up on current brain injury research because it's changed. And so, what I'm hearing you talk about with neuroplasticity is that there's not a time limit on it,
No,
right?
No, I mean, if you're aware of your injury, I think sooner can be potentially better. But there are different aspects, and you just hit it on the nail. You know, you have to find someone that is concussion literate. And so you have to work with someone that understands that if you're in an acute part of an injury, you have to work on the metabolic system, lowering inflammation, and making sure that you have the appropriate, I don't want to say rest, but give your brain the time that it needs to heal from the acute injury portions so that you can start doing some of those exercises. But you know, I wouldn't say if you got injured today and you know you have a concussion, I'm going to put off my therapy for 5 years. But if you are just now finding out 5 years later that you could do something about it, it's not too late.
There's
It's
hope for
not.
intervention wherever you're at, is what you're saying.
Yes, and I
Yeah.
do want to preface this real quick for some of my people that are listening out there. I work with a lot of military veterans, and I'm not trying to wave that as a flag. Go, oh, look at me, I work with veterans. I only say that because they have a very severe amount of concussions accumulations, something called a sequela. A sequela means when you are unhealed from a concussion and you get another one and another one and another one. And so I'm talking about like 20 mild traumatic brain injuries a day. And so blast injuries, something that puts the T in trauma, right? What you would look like and observe 17 years after, 20 years after, helicopter accidents, Humvee rollovers, and they're still able to get benefit.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to paint a picture for the person out there that maybe has been told like you're never gonna be able to heal or you need to rest and do nothing else. Like if we can help people like that, I'm sure that you can be helped as well.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I've shared before on the podcast, but year 11 after my injury was the year that I healed the most. And that's because
Yeah.
that's the year that I got my dysautonomia diagnosis, that I went to see Dr. Schmo at the Functional Neurology Center, that I finally got correct treatment and I finally got some of the metabolic stuff looked at. So I had been having chronic inflammation that had never been addressed, and it was exacerbating symptoms and undiagnosed dysautonomia and vision stuff that was going unchecked, and stuff in my neck that had gone unchecked. So I was being put on all these migraine meds when my headaches were coming from vision and neck problems that are able to be rehabbed, and so the medications were not the right treatment for me. And so that's where it's all about trying to find like what is causing your symptoms and how can you you know, support the resilience of your brain, right? So
Yeah.
I guess the next question is like, this is kind of a two-part question, but first, how does the brain know how to rewire itself after an injury? And number two, is that something that we can influence and that we can make an impact on?
The brain definitely knows how to rewire after injury. First off, your brain is really smart. Your brain's really smart. So whether it can or cannot, it's going to find a way to adapt to its surroundings. And it's not always going to do that efficiently. Sometimes some people get lucky enough that they're already doing some things in their life. Like I have people that were already doing yoga. Does that mean yoga is the answer for everyone? No. Does that mean that maybe it helped their vestibular function and now they still have pretty good vestibular function after their TBI? Yeah, possibly. So sometimes we do things daily, repetitively, lifestyle wise, that your brain kind of picks it up. And you're like, okay, so I know how to build these neurons because I'm relearning, redoing again. But I do think that it does require, to an extent, like you said, working with a concussion literate person, because even though it sounds silly, something as specific as focusing on the correct eye movements and the correct feedback and the correct transitioning of therapy to therapy, metabolic to metabolic, cognitive to cognitive, can make a big difference on like how to repair and rewire. So your brain is always adapting, always. Now, neuroplasticity can be positive or negative. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to adapt the way you want to, but it's going to adapt
Oh,
either
I want to
way.
hear more about this. Explain.
So plasticity is always happening. You're always adapting. And I like to say the word, the brain loves novelty but it also likes predictability. Okay. So we like things to be, I talk about the brain like a separate entity. So the brain likes predictability, but it also likes a challenge every now and then. And with these new challenges, our brains start to adapt. And how can I problem solve? The best way to look at these things is through a neurodevelopmental perspective. When you look at children, when you look at babies from 0 to 12 months and toddlers, as they're starting to develop these very primitive systems, you can see that they problem solve. And so, a wake window for a baby is the best time to look at plasticity at its finest, because you have these brand new brain cells that are trying to figure out and differentiate into what pathways they're going to build. They're going to play and do certain activities, and then at some point they're going to differentiate quite a bit, right? So the thing is this, the stimulation, the therapy, whatever you provide to it, it's going to adapt either correctly or incorrectly. So if I teach you or a kid to have bad posture or to sit, this is why certain PTs, OTs are very specific on what kind of chairs like babies can have as they're growing and developing. And so if you're in that sphere, you'll see all over TikTok, like this chair is really good for development. This chair is not very good for development. And so it's because plasticity, your brain is going to learn depending on what you expose it to often and often. And so it can be very good plasticity, beneficial. We talk about it a lot in the mental health world as to negative self-talk. So the same thing happens neurologically with function as well. If you are now, I'm going to flip, I'm going to everywhere on the board here. We're talking about babies, we're talking about
No, this is
now
great.
military. But if you are going to do shooting practice and you're constantly choosing a target and you cock your head and you choose one fixation target, guess what? As you do your normal life, your eyes are going to be potentially unyoked, because that's what you do repetitively over and over and over. So it's not great plasticity, right? It's not good for everyday function. So just because you can have neuroplasticity, you have to make sure that you're doing it well and getting the appropriate feedback. And that's where the concussion literate practitioner comes in.
So, what I'm hearing you say is that if we are daily spending hours on social media and scrolling and not going to bed at the right time, or, negative habits can also rewire our brain in
Absolutely.
a less optimal way. But we can also make positive changes by doing brain healthy type habits to rewire our brain in a more positive, more optimal way for recovery.
Absolutely. Lifestyle is foundational to brain health, period. And what we want to strive for as being able post TBI to get to the point that you can rely solely on your lifestyle in all of the things that are under your control as an individual. Because who wants to live in a doctor's office forever? I don't. I mean, I guess I work there, but you know,
You live in
I
a doctor's office forever by being the doctor. Very
correct.
different.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't ever foresee any patient, and that's what I tell all my patients too. Like, the point of doing therapy is to see if we can transition you back to lifestyle so you can take control over your life again. It doesn't mean that we don't need our maybe potential yearly checkup, right? We could consistently do a yearly checkup to make sure, hey, are all my cylinders firing? Because things happen, we get sick, emotional trauma happens, life happens. So you may want to do your yearly check to make sure are all cylinders firing, but lifestyle most definitely is going to make or break your recovery. Don't spend time or money on therapy plans if you are not willing to put in the work in your lifestyle, because you're just going to waste a lot of time and money. So commit to whatever you're doing and talk to your practitioner. If you don't have a practitioner that's really talking about that, challenge your practitioner. It should be a relationship, and in relationships, it requires communication from both parties. And see, mira, I just spoke Spanish. So just say, hey, what kind of things can I be doing in my lifestyle to improve this? Can you include this to be part of my treatment plan? And can you help me with that? Or can I talk to you about my lifestyle routines? And can you tell me if this is conducive or not? So you can advocate for yourself in that way if that practitioner is not bringing that up to course. But I have I've said I'm a little bit strict when it comes to my patients over here. So I literally tell every single person, if you are not willing to do some of the things that require you for sleep hygiene, for nutrition, for maybe some self discipline, we got to have grace because, part of TBI is not being able to do some of those things, and we're not trying to strive for perfectionism. But if we're not willing to make progress, if we're just shooting ourselves in the foot and, like you said, doom scrolling till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, then why are you spending all that time, money, and effort on something that's just not going to move the needle?
Hmm.
Because you're undoing it.
So, if you could give like a list of just general tips for lifestyle for brain resiliency, what would you encourage our listeners to strive for?
So I feel like I'm going to sound like a broken record for you, especially because you've heard me talk like this before. But number one, consistent blood sugar stabilization. Like, do not do crazy intermittent fasting. Do not skip meals. And this is the one thing that every TBI patient is so bad about. Even if you don't feel like you have an appetite, you can train your brain to try to want to have appetite again. And it sucks. Sometimes we have to do a little bit of mechanical eating and just eating because we know it's good for us and not because it sounds really great. But making sure that you're actually eating consistently, this is the one time that I would not be for intuitive eating. And I know a lot of people vouch for that. And the reason is your autonomic processing is not being automatic. So you cannot rely on your autonomic nervous system to signal for your brain to signal you when you should be hungry and when you should not be hungry. And so that's one of my biggest arguments is you can't necessarily 100% rely on that. You may be able to in the near future, but just not at this time. Nothing is forever. And so blood sugar stabilization is number one. Sleep is going to be the other one. And some people may be listening to this and they're like, yeah, but I can't fall asleep or I can't stay asleep. Well, at that point, you have to work with a practitioner. And so to mitigate, like, at what point can I improve my sleep? But it's definitely something that needs to be worked on. And there are things that you can do. You can wear blue light blockers 2 hours before bed every single night. There are things that you can do to mitigate. You can make sure that you read an actual book instead of maybe that's the Bible, maybe that's just like fiction. I don't care, whatever tickles your fancy, but not doom scrolling, not setting yourself up for failure, avoiding emotional conflict right before bed. Oh my God, that's when I see all the time that it's like they want to have a conversation or a fight or something with someone, learning how to have appropriate boundary settings with people so that you're not riling or your system so that you're not tired and wired. And then I think the only other thing would be mobility. Just move. Don't be sedentary. Look, I'm just going to say this real quick. I've had TBIs. You can totally tell if you know me in person. I just had a baby. Postpartum was crazy. I had no time to go to the gym. So now I think I told you, like, after I had my baby, it felt like I had a concussion all over again. It was insane. Um, you can find time to be able to do these things. I have a 25-pound kettlebell at home, and once a day I do my little set workout, and I feel so much better, and I am mobile. So it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to actually own a gym membership to go. You just need to know how to do some mobility. And nowadays, YouTube have a mirror, you can learn how to move. Now, you may want to talk to a specialist if you want to try to get proper form and function, but no one is prohibiting you to do at least neck range of motion every day at home. So those are three things that I think are going to be essential: blood sugar, mobility, and sleep.
That's great. I really appreciate just the reminders of those because also when you think like all those things, brain injury symptoms feel like they impact those so much that it feels like it's impossible. Even, you talked about forgetting to eat. I would definitely struggle with that. But then I also struggled with overeating, of impulse
Mm-hmm.
control issues, right? Or like cravings. I didn't know this, but my gut microbiome was completely messed up. I've had to work with a practitioner working on that. I'm actually currently working on that. Being able to, when you eat consistently, but eat the healthy foods, right, that are brain healthy. I love the reminder of sleep hygiene. and not being on screens before bed and doing everything you can to set yourself up and intentional movement. It doesn't mean pushing yourself, right?
No.
These are just small, consistent daily things. And like you talked before about neuroplasticity, I think the overarching theme seems to be like consistency, right? Your
Yeah.
brain craves consistency.
Yeah. Predictability, consistency, and novelty. So maybe sometimes you do change your routine a little bit. Maybe it doesn't look the same. Like maybe one week you follow one routine, the next week you tweak it, and it doesn't have to be tweaked like 180 degrees. You can tweak it 5%. And so
I love that.
maybe you switch the book that you're reading. Maybe you switch when you shower throughout the day. So it doesn't have to be difficult. And I think that there's an aspect to healthcare in general that we're always trying to make look very difficult, and it doesn't have to be like that. And so for some people, that's very stressful because a lot of people like to live in stress. Cortisol is addicting. And sometimes we get addicted to things that are familiar to us. And it actually is more stressful to not have cortisol in our lives because that's just unfamiliar to us.
Mm.
And with TBI, that's very common because your system isn't working well. So you bump cortisol all day, every day from faulty systems. And we can do a whole conversation on that another time too. But it definitely gets to the point that we need to be able to get out of that cycle and remind ourselves like this doesn't need to be complicated. I can still have a lot of control. And when you do that mind switch, you actually start doing better because you're not getting in your way of being able to do consistency. And that's when a person actually becomes resilient.
That's so helpful. I think that I can relate to that addicted to stress because it's like I would find myself struggling with silence, struggling with
Hmm.
rest, or like in prayer, right? Not being able to sit with myself. It's uncomfortable, not being able to sit in that silence. And, it's like I had not considered the neurological implication of that, though. I often would equate it to like my effort or me not doing well enough. And then, then you enter into those negative self talks patterns. And so,
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about stress and trauma and how that impacts brain resiliency or what people
Yeah.
can do to maybe work through that a bit?
Yeah, so absolutely. Now I want to validate there is a part of TBI that can cause perseveration and can cause rumination of thought.
Can you explain what both of those mean in colloquial
So
ways?
it's kind of like what you just said, which is like the inability to sit still and kind of have like things just kind of a hamster wheel in your head going over and over and just unable to do these things. So I'm not trying to devalue that portion, but and at that point you do need a practitioner to work with so that you can actually slow that hamster wheel down and get that umph. But there are definitely things we do in our lifestyle that exacerbate that hamster wheel. And so and I can tell from some of my patients when they're just doing these simple shifts in their lifestyle, they're not focusing on the perfection of it. They're just saying, hey, maybe the hamster in my wheel was 60 miles an hour today, but yesterday when I did everything well, it actually felt like 45 miles an hour and it was really good. So you're looking for progress, not perfection on that. And the thing about stress and trauma is that it's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So the brain has a really fun way to be able to work with some of that stuff. Personally, in TBI, I see that more with memory than anything else. And so when I see a person struggle a lot with memory and all of their other functioning is really well and good, then I make referrals to more specific EMDR, maybe a little bit more specific stuff. I do want to make a quick caveat. If you have never done eye movement therapy and you do not know how good your eye movements are, EMDR is something you want to hold on off on because it is a tool that's utilized in EMDR. Eyes are powerful when it comes to trauma. And so you want to make sure you work with an EMDR therapist that understands eye movement stability and TBI because I have had patients in the past go into very negative trauma cycles because their eyes don't move efficiently, and that's a tool used in EMDR. I've also worked with a lot of patients that have done eye movement therapy and then subsequently gone to EMDR and gotten lightning better. So, it's all about function and how you are doing and knowing where you're at. Now, when it comes to stress and trauma, it's just one of those things that it's part of the pie chart, right? I think in the same way as the physiological aspects of TBI, I think sometimes we want to overcomplicate trauma. And so it can be as simple as giving it to God, giving it to Jesus, and laying it down at his feet and like learning what it means to do full acceptance and surrender. And it can be also just as simple as doing a conversation or a prayer with another person. And you can even do a psych meeting with your psychologist and actually speak it out. So I think sometimes we want to make it so complicated, like how do I heal this trauma? And sometimes it's just really a conversation or a surrender. It's not always like that because I've seen opposite sides of the spectrum, but I do want to add that portion to it because I know a lot of patients I've had have come back to me and said like, wow, I guess all I needed was to just talk about that and really not even think about it. And I feel really good. My quality of life is better because that's all we're looking for, right? Is we're not looking to remove our trauma or 100% heal our TBI or 100% remove that virus. We're looking for quality of life.
Yeah. That's great. So I love all of that, and personally I appreciated that because actually the therapist I've been seeing, a trauma therapist, she recommended that I try EMDR next. So I may be starting that. So I have done the vision therapy and my eye movements are stable now. So that's really helpful to know that that was done in the right order, which I
Yeah.
had never even considered. So um
Yeah,
I
those are
think
tidbits that are very, very important. It can make or break your EMDR experience.
that's so interesting. That reminds me of something. I think in the interview we did with Dr. Schmo a couple months ago, one of the things he said was that therapies need to be done in the correct order. That if they're not done in the correct order, that you could be exacerbating something without realizing
Hmm.
it.
I agree. And for each person, that order may be different. And
Hmm.
so that's why individualized care is so important. But I 100% agree. At least at a neurodevelopmental perspective, we definitely need to start working on a neurodevelopmental perspective issue. I don't know how much I would do straight cognitive therapy before I even look at a person's eyes and vestibular system.
Yeah,
So,
that's so important. So
so
when
I
it
agree with
comes
Doc.
to
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's great. So when it comes to brain resilience, right? After brain injury, I want to get a little bit more like on the emotional side for people. It can be really discouraging. And
Hmm.
a lot of times, especially when you've been living with brain injury for a certain amount of time, or maybe I've had a lot of people in our groups feeling discouraged that they can't afford the treatments or they're not
Hmm.
able to, you know, get the therapies they want. And that's where I'm trying on the podcast to help people with lifestyle and with things they can do at home, even if they're not able to have access, right? So it's like, but it can get really discouraging to feel like, maybe you're not going anywhere. So are there any signs that people can look for that would show that their brain is healing or adapting, or that there is some neuroplasticity and brain resilience happening? Like, what are
Yeah.
things that people can look out for?
So this is a really great question. And it's, you know, we've talked about this kind of like off camera a little bit, but one of the biggest issues and hurdles is that there is a point at which you do need feedback from a practitioner. It's like going to the gym that doesn't have mirrors, and then you can't see yourself actually squatting or doing the movement, so you don't know how to correct the movement. And so when it comes to TBI, eye movements, and some of these things, you definitely need feedback from an actual person. Now, I just want to preface that because I have learned that if you're trying to reach certain goals, it may require you to actually work with someone. And I've seen some really funky stuff online. You could totally heal this all by yourself. Hey, there are some people that get help purely online, and that's great. I know our clinic offers online services. We've talked about that before. Sometimes when you can't necessarily get in person with someone, maybe you can get coaching from a person from afar, and that can be very, very helpful. But I always tell my coaching clients too, you know, this is as much as I can do at this level. And some people get the quality of life that they want and they feel good and satisfied, and that's what they want, and they can move forward with it. Some people realize, all right, I believe I'm at the next phase that I'm ready to actually see a practitioner. And like Dr. Schmo said, what is my next order of priority as to what do I want to continue to elevate from? If you're that person that, can't necessarily do that and you're not necessarily working with a coach, and like I have to say coach because practitioners can only be practitioners with people that are in the same state. So if you're in a different state, they can't use their licensure and they have to be called a coach at that point. So just for people trying to wonder like why. So that's why that happens. But if you're not doing any of that, what you can do is number one, like we just talked about, making sure that the things that are under your control are some of the things that you can do. So I think it gets a little tricky when you start looking at cranial nerve signs and symptoms. I would definitely put that more to working with a coach or some kind of practitioner, because I know personally from my own injuries how difficult it is to tell that within yourself, because your brain is hardwired to not look at those deficiencies. And so for some people, they just know that they're running themselves into a wall daily and that's about it. But there are things that you can do. You can get an Aura ring, you can get a Whoop, you can get data metric trackers that can actually tell you how you're performing on a day-to-day basis and can give you objective data to see what is your sleep score, what is your food. You can do blood glucose monitors as well if that's something that you're wanting to work on. And so those are some of the things that I think that if you're not actively working with someone and you not necessarily wanting to solely rely on lifestyle work, kind of like an in between on, okay, what else can I do for myself if I'm not actively working with someone, but I need to do a little bit more than just symptom tracking, because I'm not the biggest fan of symptom tracking, only because we can talk ourselves into a lot of things.
Yeah, I love that. You're so inspirational. You've mentioned your injuries a couple times. Can you just share a little bit more about like your concussions experience and how you've been able to recover to the point where you can practice?
Yeah. Well, a big fear of mine for a long time was actually like, will I ever be functional enough that I can actually help people? And that's a fear for everyone with like
Mhm.
TBI. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like a broken car with like broken car parts. Like, how, if I can't even help myself, how am I going to help other people? And so, I can tell you that I did get my own functional neurology done. Much like a lot of other women, they tend to have PCOS after like a TBI. And, I had a slew of like hormone dysfunction after TBI. I've had quite a few. I've had like six. And so my major ones were in cheerleading. So I did competitive cheerleading and I had some tumbling accidents, but I also got kicked like a soccer ball on my head. And so I don't remember the incident. I know that years, and I mean years later, I spoke to my mom about it, and she was like, that's not what happened at all. And then she actually told me what happened, and I was like, I don't have any recollection of that, like at all. Like my story and her story, my brain fabricated something totally different. And so I know that for me, I was one of those people. My mom had a Charcot-Marie tooth, for those of you that know what it is, and she was handicapped, and she also had a lot of cancer, and so the bar was low when it came to like healthcare. And so I always thought, well, I don't have cancer, I don't look like her, so I must be totally fine, and that wasn't true. So I was definitely struggling through TBI-like symptoms, but never really understood it. I went to functional neurology for people like my mom, and when I went to clinics, they started doing testing on me, and that's how I had education from some of the other practitioners that were like, so let's talk about you. And
Yeah.
I remember being like, I also thought like I don't think I've ever lost consciousness or anything like that. But what I realized is my memory from my injuries was very jacked. And that's what prompted me to ask more people about some of these things. One of them involves cliff jumping. The other, I know, I have stupid decisions. Some of them are not very fabulous, which is like running into a wall. So, some of them are fabulous, if you can say that. But I think that it just, for me, it really exacerbated a lot of eye movements. I know this eye barely moved, so my eyes were very unyoked. I had a lot of cerebellar and vestibular issues. My center of pressure was completely off, and my hormones were totally jacked because of it. And it wasn't until I started working with a functional neurologist and I did like a week's worth therapy, and then I started learning how to implement lifestyle things. I just want to let people know I'm a functional neurologist. I've only done therapy for 1 week once in my life, and I have just maintained my lifestyle and every now and then done other therapies because I now understand my body, my brain, and how it functions and how to best support it. I am the first person to tell you that I can be a little strict when it comes to my blood sugar, when it comes to my lifestyle routine. As I already told you, I have that 25-pound kettlebell. And so I have no excuses. I can put my baby down for 5 minutes and do a few squats, right? And so I am the first person to kind of like practice what I preach. And that's why I say so much on how the importance of lifestyle, because I've done it for myself. And so I'm not saying that I probably wouldn't benefit from doing a whole week again. I don't think anyone that wouldn't, but you can definitely get to a point that your quality of life is good enough that you can actually get to a point of actually helping other people. And so I've done a lot. I've done hormone regulation, I've done TBI therapy, I've done my at home homework, I've done nutrition, I've done ozone, I've done hyperbaric. And so now, in the past few years, I've accumulated a lot of things that I've done that I think have really moved the needle for me. And a lot of these things are going to become more accessible to people too, because a lot of places are opening places up. I know that a lot of veterans are starting to be able to get hyperbaric covered for them, but it's like Dr. Schmo said, the order in which you do things makes a difference. And so I think that that's what a lot of people need. So that's why I harp on like people that can't necessarily be in an office to kind of maybe get advice or coaching or something like that, because that's going to move the needle quite a bit more instead of kind of shooting darts in a
Mhm.
wall. And that's why I'm such a big advocate for like trackers as well, because it gives you objective data. Like, is what you're doing actually working or not? Do you have an objective that you're looking for? Is it heart rate? Is it sleep improvement? Is it going to be, activity levels? What is it?
Yeah. That's great. First of all, thank you for sharing some of your personal experience. I think, people hearing you
I'm very
share.
joyful about it.
Well, I
Which
think
people are like,
people,
why?
well, I mean, people hearing you share all of these things with so much passion, it makes sense because you've actually lived it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I can relate to the feeling of like, oh, am I too broken to help people, right? But it's like showing up as yourself and, just taking those small steps forward each day. Like that's resilience. Resilience
Hmm.
is taking those tiny steps. We can't implement every lifestyle change in 1 week. It's not possible, but pick one thing. Pick sleep this week. Work on your sleep hygiene. Do that for 2 weeks consistently. Then go with nutrition or maybe opposite. I don't know, whatever works for you, right? But like, and then go with movement and kind of like implement them a little bit at a time because it can feel overwhelming to kind of hear it all at once. But if you can make those small changes, you can impact your brain's resiliency and you can impact your emotional resiliency too. And believe in yourself that, setting small goals and reaching them is good for us. It's great for us. I love checking
Yeah.
off something and you feel a sense of accomplishment even if it was just I went to sleep at 9 p.m.
Yes. You got
multiple
to
nights in a
celebrate the
row.
little wins. You got to celebrate the little wins. And I do want to also say, like, I think a lot of people like look at me and like hear me talk about this and they're like, your TBI must have not been that bad because you're a little too happy. And I do want to say, like, I want to acknowledge I did have a season in life that I was incredibly depressed, that I was incredibly anxious, that I literally cried almost every single day. I also went through my period of why God, why? And I also went through my period of everything in the world's going to harm me. I call it my paranoia stage, that I quite literally didn't even use, like, I mean, there's a whole debate on this online, but any drop of makeup, any toxin, anything. I mean, I didn't even look like myself. Clearly, I have some on today, but I definitely have gone through the hard parts. I've gone through the frustration of, if this was that easy, why didn't no practitioner help me with this? Like, why am I, this could have ruined my life if I would have kept going that direction. So I definitely know what the dark side looks like. But I think, like, that's the whole point of Hope Survives, right? Is to make sure that we know that you don't have to live in that darkness. You can try to process it and become resilient day to day, little by little. And there is another side that you can get to the point that, like, my TBI is something I'm grateful for. And so something I didn't even know I had at some point, until one of the doctors were like, "You are messed up." And I was like, "What do you mean?" So I was definitely one of those people that was like, "I'm good." And they're like, "You're not good at
Well,
all."
and just pushing and pushing yourself, it's not healthy, right? You have to learn how to recognize. So I love everything you shared. We do have to wrap up here, but as far as what you shared about, like, that's the point of Hope Survives, that's exactly the point of Hope Survives. We want everyone to have access to resources and help and hope, and know that there are so many things that you can do to support your brain's recovery, help you find the right treatments, help you find community and connection. And Dr. Eisenmann, I just want to thank you for believing in the mission of Hope Survives and joining our board of directors. It's huge. It's a big commitment, and we are so grateful for you, and just your dedication to help brain injury survivors, not only as a practitioner, but also volunteering on our board. It's really meaningful, and we're excited to get to do more with you as we move forward, and grow the organization. But as we are into the end of this particular interview, what are your final words of hope for our listeners, brain injury survivors, and their families?
I think that everyone in TBI has their own journey, and everyone's at a different point. Do not compare yourself to another person. Some of you may be in that darkness phase. Some of you may be in the phase that you have already accumulated, maybe some therapies of each kind, and you're trying to figure out how it all combines together. But there is no rush. Health is a lifelong journey. And so we can try to move a little bit piece by piece. Now, for some of you, you may be hearing that discouraged because you're like, okay, but I can't even literally live today. I understand that. I've been where you are. And I can tell you that if you do what Cristabelle said, that you go day by day, week by week, all of a sudden that becomes years. And so I guess that's like the hope that I want to instill in that today.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. If people want to get in touch with you, your Instagram is the Brainfluencer, which I love.
Regrets.
No, I love it. Keep it forever. It's amazing. The Brainfluencer, influencing people's brains. Perfect. That's what you do. And your clinic, do you want to share the
Oh,
website
yeah.
for that?
Yes, it is ironically, not ironically, called resiliencybh.com. We are in Coppell, Texas. We do 15-minute free discovery calls because I know that's usually a hamper for some people. I'm like, I don't know if I should call, I don't know if I should call. And yeah, we'll be honest with you on if we think we can help or not, or if we're the first step for you or not. But we are resiliencybh.com, and our phone number is 469-830-2090. The only thing I ask, if anyone's going to reach out, just let us know that you came from this podcast so that we know, who we're reaching.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here today. And I can't wait to put out this episode. I think people really need to hear this. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Hope Survives podcast. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned, and would love for you to consider leaving us a rating or review. Check out hopesurvives.org for more. We'll see you next time. And remember, there is always hope.